All right, very good. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Tired Boys podcast, the number one Kyle Larson's fan podcast in the world. I'm your host, Justin.
And I'm Aaron. Welcome back, everyone, after a nice long summer break we've had for F1 and a slightly delayed podcast because I just got back into the States a little while ago. But yeah, Justin, I'm excited to be back. It's good to see you. I feel like we've got a lot of good stuff to dig into today.
Oh my gosh, my friend, have I been looking forward to seeing you. It felt like I was journeying through a desert with no water over the Formula One summer break with just no end in sight, and every little glimmer of news was like, it's an oasis on the horizon. Oh no, it's just a camel skeleton, and there was just another week to go. So my friend, it is like a breath of fresh air, a drink of cool water seeing you here, having Formula One back for the Dutch Grand Prix. It was absolute treat. Happy to be here and to chit chat a little bit about it.
Yeah, well, and talking about cool water, it's apparently just not a thing in Europe. So that was like a very odd surprise to me that you're like one have to like pay for water just to have it with your dinner, and then they just like give it to you lukewarm in like a glass jar. They're like, it looks fancy, but it's also the same temperature as outside, so not that refreshing. This is refreshing. This is what I've been antsy to get back into, knowing that once I got back, we were going to be able to jump right back into it. I had a blast, but this is going to be a fun episode today. So why don't we go ahead and hop right on into the start of the episode with the quick hitters.
Let's first
off, I wanted to just give a quick shout out to my new Portuguese friend Mario. He took Colleen and I and a group of us on a trip around Sintra in Portugal. While we were chatting and getting to know him, he's kind of he's not a tour guide. It was experience kind of him showing us around where he grew up and the different very like cool historic places and whatnot around. But he told me he was an F1 fan. He is a Lando fan. He was pumped because this was like the day after the race and everything, so he was feeling good. He was a little iffy on me when I told him I was a Max fan, but I think we're doing okay. But I had to give him a shout out. I mentioned the podcast. He wanted to look it up and find it. So, Mario, if you're listening, we had a blast. Thank you for checking it out. And we're looking forward to continuing on in the episode here, and hope you take a listen to future ones as well.
Shout out Mario. Thanks for listening. That's exciting, dude.
Yeah, it was cool. It was fun getting to chat with people about F1 and everything. But on to the first quick hitter I had. Of course, us Americans just having to not take no for an answer. Andretti has now continued on this track of bringing the U.S. government into their rejection from Formula One. So they've now gotten the U.S. Department of Justice to launch an antitrust investigation into Liberty Media and the rejection. Of course, I don't know where this is going to go. I can't imagine that the U.S. government's going to be able to force Andretti into F1, but it sounds like, who knows, we'll get into some other conversations shortly, but there might be some teams that need some cash and might be looking for a way out potentially. But I know another quick hitter you had here. Talk about Kyle Larson's fan club for us.
Dude, all right, so this was shout out Jason. He brought this up at Monday Night Magic, and I didn't hear anything about it, so I was not really able to give like my opinion because I just didn't know. And to be fair, I'm not entirely aware of like who Kyle Larson is and was at the time. So you find out that after like one of the most recent NASCAR races, there was a flurry of questions. Maybe flurry is the wrong word, but there was a question posed to what I believe is the P2 driver of that NASCAR race. And they were like, hey, you came up a little bit short. Why? And he went on to describe that Kyle Larson may just be one of the best ever, and it's tough to beat a guy that's on form like that. Okay, so then they go to Kyle Larson and they're like, hey, everybody here, they're bigging you up, and they're like, what do you think about this? And he's like, well, I am pretty good, I gotta say. And they're like, well, hey, what about like do you feel like you would have to beat Max Verstappen to like call yourself the best in the world? He says, nah. No, 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 no. I just know in my mind that I'm better than him. And they're like, all right, cool, 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 cool. So then, it is red versus blue. Are you team Kyle Larson? Are you team Max Verstappen? I was like, I don't know. So I can't pick one side or the other. But if you go back and you look at Kyle Larson's, just racing career in general, recent racing career, he has a flurry of poor results. He has a couple middling results, and he has some highlights like over the course of his career. If you look at Max, like it skews towards like the winning side, but overall, he has much less like series involvement, right? Like Kyle has dipped into a bunch of different disciplines, as the buzzword is now in the conversation. So it's interesting to look at. But if you're just going by the Wikipedia page, the one thing that stands out to me is the records and achievements section that is just 100% missing from Larson's page and massive for Max's page. So, yeah, I'm leaning towards, just based on the record holding, that Max has done more in his important series. Let's say that. So just kind of digesting what I saw, reading over a couple of Larson's like historic races and some of his like years in NASCAR, like he hasn't had like a just standout career like some of the rookies that we've seen come into Formula One, where they've dominated Formula 3, dominated Formula 2. They get an early contract, to get signed. So I think the trajectory has been a little bit different. I imagine everybody who is looking at this issue is completely level-headed, non-biased, and is going to just look at the facts logically. Like that's, I'm assuming everybody is doing this. So that's what I did, and this was just my assessment of the scenario, that we just have two drivers that are pretty good, and Kyle Larson seems to think that he's better than the rest. When posed to Max, like it was kind of a non-issue for him, so I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's like apples to oranges to some extent, because the majority of Kyle Larson's career, he's racing in like stock car racing, so they're the same machinery essentially with minor differences and everything. Not the same as Formula One, where Red Bull definitely did create the most dominant car for a decent period of time in this last couple of years, where Max has been able to really rack up. Like Max, obviously being one of the best drivers on the grid currently in Formula One, but other than in Formula One racing, Max's only other disciplines that he's raced in is sim racing for like GT cars and things like that. So when it comes to...
But that's a video game!
I mean, it's still another discipline, and I think it's also like Max will probably go into the endurance racing and like that physical racing format after his Formula One career. Kyle Larson, again, stock cars, so it's not as easy to be as dominant even if you are the best driver in that racing format. But he also just has had a much different career and has driven in dirt track racing. He was driving in the Indy 500 this past year. He's driven NASCAR. He's done NASCAR trucks. He's done just like kind of a little bit of everything and been successful and towards the top of the competition in like so as a all-around well-rounded racer. He has a much longer career at this point than Max does. He's older. He's been racing in these professional series for longer, so that's one thing that he can tout. But also just so many different disciplines of racing. I think he's just like, yeah, like I'm the better racer because I'm more well-rounded. Max has not ever, and we've talked about it over the past couple years, anytime he's broken a record or they're like, oh, Max, you did this, you did that, he's like, I just want to win my goal is to win every time I'm out there. Like, I don't concern myself with these records and whatnot. So Max's reaction, not shocking to me. Kyle Larson's reaction, I can understand why he does it, and it also, I think NASCAR personalities are just a bit more like boisterous than a lot of the F1 guys, so it doesn't shock me in the slightest that he was like, yeah, man, I'm the better racer. Like, of course I am. But I found that kind of funny. I also wanted to just tag on, since you added this on, but Scott McLaughlin, one of the IndyCar drivers who has also driven in a number of different racing fields, he's from New Zealand, was commenting on some of the tweets that were out there about Max and the Red Bull car not being very good and the oversteer and whatnot. And the replies were absolutely hilarious because people were like, oh, Scott, you don't know, like not knowing who he was, like, you don't know what you're talking about, man. And just like trying to like, oh, I'm sure you know so much from your F1 career and this and that. And he's like, been a world champion in like a bunch of different races. He went straight from like stock cars to IndyCar and like from the top of stock car racing immediately to being one of the top drivers in IndyCar and everything. It's like, I think the guy probably knows a little bit about what he's talking about. But yeah, that was my other entertainment from that kind of tertiary realm when it came to talking about F1 this past week.
For sure, yeah, and so just like just a really funny conversation to encounter. I mean, yeah, I think who you believe is better kind of depends on like what you select for in your racer. It feels like in some weird simplistic way, it feels like quality over quantity in this realm. In like that's like very reductive, obviously, but yeah, just a very funny scenario to encounter. But we can continue on to some of our other quick hitters that we have here.
Yeah, so the next one was just about the Haas F1 team. So there was a dispute, of course, with Earl Colley, who was their previous title sponsor back in 2022, when the Russian company was kind of split from Formula One racing, along with other Russian kind of companies, drivers like Nikita Mazepin and all. There, I guess, was a payment that Haas was supposed to refund some of the sponsorship money that they had paid into the team that just never happened. And so Earl Colley had put in with a Dutch court to basically hold Haas in the Netherlands until they either made the payment or they were allowed to seize assets equal to the payment, what the cars, whatever, like to equal this $9 million outstanding refund. So the Haas was able to now leave the Netherlands, but they were not able to initially after the race. I believe it took a day or two for the payment to make it through and whatnot from Haas to the company. But they should be on time for this week's race in Monza. But weird situation there, and just kind of funky that Haas was like, "Oh yeah, like we're kicking you out of sponsorship, but we're keeping your money, man." So and to make it 2 years without having to pay it back is just beyond me. That's pretty wild.
That is wild. I have to feel for Haas in that scenario where I can't imagine the airport prison was too comfortable for such a large team. I wonder where they jammed the Formula One cars, how they stowed them in the airport.
Yeah, I mean it's not well they probably just like had to hold off on checking their bags until they were finished with the payment and everything.
They just had to hold everything.
Yeah, just sitting there sleeping on the airport floor, but yeah, just a funky situation. I wasn't sure if it was going to affect their timing on even potentially missing like practice sessions and whatnot. I don't believe it's going to, but yeah, weird thing to pop up this past week during the Dutch Grand Prix. But then for the final quick hitter, you had mentioned to me just at the start of the episode here about or right before the episode about some biofuels and kind of the future of that in F1. So why don't you give us a little more detail on that?
Yeah, so it seems like Formula One has a new partner. They partnered with I guess a forerunner in alternative energy, you would say, a company by the name of Agreco. And it seems like it's part of the net zero by 2030 initiative that Formula One has been working on for some time now, where they've been working towards the goal of reducing their carbon emissions footprint, pollution, whatever you want to call it, reducing that to, net zero, where the running of a Formula One race doesn't contribute at all to the global concerns, you could say, like ecological concerns. So this partnership with Agreco is, I think, a big step forward in that, is kind of my understanding. So the idea, I think, starting in 2025, possibly 2026, depending on how quickly they can get it off the ground, they're looking to incorporate, basically, my understanding was a paddock-wide power grid system that was going to be fueled by like alternative biofuels and like fuels made from like vegetables and things like, or like yeah, I'm no expert, but
I think it's
instead
primarily
of
like algae that they use that create their own oils that are then processed into biofuels. That's what I recall from typically being the primary source, because algae can grow so easily. So the systems that I recall when I had looked into this years and years ago was that would be the primary source of the oils that would then be processed into biofuels, more so than like vegetables and whatnot. But I believe there are some things with like corn and ethanol and whatnot that probably would be an additional option. I think my biggest question in terms of that is, especially with Formula One, adding on so many new street circuits moving around. There are conversations with the Rwandan government about a potential race in Africa. It was very, very early on, so I wasn't going to get too into that really today until we get a little bit more insight. But as we're adding on all these additional races, street circuits in different cities and everything, I'd be curious how easily the systems would be able to be set up for, like, is it a massive generator that would have to be transported back and forth? Because then, of course, is that really net zero if you're having to haul and use like fuels and whatnot to get this generator from place to place? Is it something that you would have set up in each location ahead of time, or would be a agreement for anyone having a race that they would have to have this like power system generator and everything set up there? So I'm sure there's still plenty of those odds and ends that they're figuring out. But in general, the net zero by 2030 initiative, I think, is just a good thing, especially if we're able to continue to have motor racing. It's not electric cars as opposed to like Formula E. We still have the hybrid systems and whatnot, but I think the whole thing with F1 being like motor racing, even if you're changing the type of fuel that the cars are using, I think that is something that's just very much a part of what makes F1 F1. So it's cool that they're utilizing these other ways of hitting that net zero and kind of trying to keep Formula One still in the same vein as it's always been.
Yeah, for sure. Because some of the hardcore fans say, "Well, if it doesn't sound like those V10s, I don't want it."
Yeah.
And a nice little just electric system does not sound like that, of course. So yeah, have to find a middle ground in that regard. But this new partnership, like I'd said, with the company Agreco seems like a great step forward in that direction. Excited to see kind of what that means, if we as like viewers notice anything different, or if it just kind of blends right into the background. But just knowing that they're not producing as much, I guess, waste, you could say. So that's really exciting. But we've got a bunch more coming in the episode. Let's do our "You Work Here" segment. We've got a bunch of moving and shaking in rosters and personnel. So let's get into it.
Yeah, so I'm just going to run through the first couple of these pretty quickly. So Bono, Lewis Hamilton's race engineer at Mercedes, he is being promoted to the head of race engineering for 2025 at Mercedes, which is, an exciting opportunity for him. Especially there were conversations of, oh, will he leave with Lewis? Oh, no, he can't because of XYZ reason, contract obligations and whatnot. So for him to have that opportunity, I think is a really, really cool thing for him. So congrats to him on that promotion for next year. For Red Bull, Jonathan Wheatley, the sporting director, is going to be becoming the new Audi F1 team principal starting 2026. So he's going to be joining the Audi project, I believe, over the next year to start getting integrated into that system and all. So another big move for someone within Red Bull away from the team, which is it's interesting seeing some of these larger moves and kind of where different people are going. And these are all confirmed. So the next confirmed one, big one, Jack Doohan, Alpine driver for the 2025 season, son of the 5-time Grand Prix motorcycle 500cc world champion Mick Doohan. He was third in Formula 2 in his last year. I believe that was in 2022. And so moving up into F1, I think it's good to see the different academy drivers actually having those opportunities to move up into seats. We've talked about other guys like Felipe Dragovich not having the opportunity to move up into that seat. Liam Lawson, Dennis Hauger, or Isaac Hadjar, with probably not having those opportunities with Red Bull or the Red Bull team for the coming year. So it's cool to see someone who's been developed in the Alpine system being brought up, who's had some success in the lower racing series and all to move up into that seat.
Yeah, for sure. Right time, right place for this guy. He's kept his visibility up since his time in Formula 2. I've seen him a good amount on both like pre-race shows, post-race shows. He's worked like on the broadcast team doing analysis with them. So even while not on the grid like in a racing capacity in that regard, at least not losing the, I don't want to say spotlight obviously, but like losing the on deck phase, right? There's
Yeah.
like every couple of years there's like this on deck phase of drivers, and I would argue Jack Doohan was one of them. Kept his visibility up, and yeah, like you said, right time, right place, especially for an Alpine team that has been experiencing what felt like a bunch of like roster woes. It felt like Gasly and Ocon were not really able to work that well together. We don't know what happened off the track, but what would happen on the track was indicative of two drivers that were not giving any room to each other. There was very minimal teamwork going on. So a volatile situation, one could say, for Alpine. So quite an exciting time for Jack Doohan, where, again, just right time, right place, able to be that guy for the team. And so he'll be taking the seat up with Pierre Gasly for the 2025 Alpine team.
Yeah, and so I'm looking forward to seeing how he does this coming year. Another rookie in F1. We've got a couple of different rookies now on the grid that are confirmed, at least, with Jack Doohan and Ollie Behrman coming in. The other, I think the unconfirmed things I want to talk about a little bit before the kind of big bomb that was dropped the other day. But Aston Martin apparently is now the front runner for signing Adrian Newey. They've also put out that they are want to spare no expense to potentially go after Max Verstappen over the coming years as a potential option to drive for them. So some big moves potentially in the works for Aston Martin. Really looking to improve on, I think, the trajectory that the team has. They were able to move themselves from a kind of lower midfield team in towards the top of the midfield at a couple of different points in times, but now have kind of stagnated to some extent. The Adrian Newey signing would be massive for them. If that is confirmed, and of course anyone would be happy to have Max, I think, as their driver at this point in time. But then the other unconfirmed, which Toto may have accidentally confirmed in an interview talking about his drivers, but Kimi Antonelli is still, of course, the front runner for that Mercedes seat that we've keep hearing. That, yeah, like you said, or as you indicated over there, a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge, for Kimi Antonelli. So that, from what I was reading, will most likely be confirmed this week at Monza, but still have not officially heard. The biggest news in terms of rosters, though, is kind of an odd or interesting one. Logan Sargent has been dropped for the rest of the season from Williams. He won't be competing anymore for the team. And the reason I say it's odd is not because his performance doesn't necessarily warrant it. It's more so, in my mind, who they brought in for the replacement. And so bringing in young Formula 2 driver Franco Colapinto to finish out the rest of the season, it's just odd because he has, of course, no Formula 1 experience other than a couple of FP1 sessions. He is not signed for a seat for next year with this team or any other team. So, I mean, he maybe becomes the Williams reserve driver or something like that. But it just seems weird to, instead of taking the guy that you've had on your team for a year and a half now, who, yeah, he's not putting up great performances and whatnot. I don't know if the damage to the car this week was that straw in terms of financially causing them to need to move away from him. I imagine that.
Oh, let me tell you,
it had to have a part, but to bring in an untested young driver, I don't know if that's gonna make any difference. I think that's almost even more likely that he'll have an incident, or if he doesn't, it will most likely be because he's just being too safe, and he's going to be at the back of the pack by a wide margin. So, you're just throwing him, just I don't know, just race one driver. Just have only Alex Albon out there. Save yourself some money, save yourself some parts. I imagine that it's not going to be that valuable for them to have Franco Colapinto other than his sponsorship money that he'll be bringing in. It's the only positive that I can see from that decision.
I have a lot of thoughts on some of those points actually. Coming in, is it going to be an improvement? Will he just drive too safely? Honestly, that may just be what Williams wants right now. It's just somebody that just will not crash their car. My understanding of this weekend's crash specifically, they had brought I don't want to say a fully new, but they brought an upgrade package to the track at Zandvoort that was supposed to be a pretty large aerodynamics upgrade for the car. And just within minutes, effectively, this guy just smashes it on, putting two wheels in the grass. I think that was the final straw. It sounded as though Williams put a lot of money into that car's upgrade package and a lot of time, thought, data concerns, right? And he just smashed it again. I imagine it is not what they want to do. This feels like a best of a really unfortunate scenario because what it sounded like from the James Vowles interview that I read, they didn't have much of a choice. I don't think there were many other drivers that were in a position to be able to fill in that many weekends. Also, our team's going to release these drivers. I mean, there's got to be so much that goes into a decision like this that it's an impossible situation for Williams, and for it to land specifically on James Vowles, that's just brutal. But I think it was the straw that broke the camel's back was the investment into this aero package, and not even in the race. This wasn't even in the race, my guy. He smashes it on the wall.
I mean,
lights it on fire as well.
I mean, it was rainy weather. It was very easy for anyone to do that. Of course,
sure.
Easier for Logan than others, as it seems. But
it's not the first one.
No, it's not.
It's one of 6 this year, right?
Right. And I'm not saying that there's any reason to have kept him. I just imagine that Colapinto, it could potentially be just equally as dangerous to the team and car, if not potentially more dangerous, because he has no experience in a Formula One car. He's probably not physically quite. I mean, I know he's driving F2, but we saw how brutal it was for Ollie Behrman and everything coming in for just one race on his neck and on his body.
Look at his neck. Look at his neck.
I mean, having Colapinto come into Monza, the temple of speed, doesn't sound like the safest place to have a guy who's probably physically not quite up to speed, as well as experientially not up to speed. I mean, you got to do what you got to do. I know they wanted to get Liam Lawson, but Red Bull, they couldn't come to an agreement to release Lawson to be that temp driver for them. But I really, I don't know if this is the right call. Outside of the only thing that I can explain it away with is that it's out from what I read. Colapinto sponsors are giving $500,000 per race that he races to the Williams team, so that will cover so much in terms of the costs of damages and things like that they've incurred to the vehicle over the season and everything. But I mean, I know money talks. That's a lot of money that's a lot of talking. But I'm very interested to see how that pans out with him in the car itself, starting this weekend. But I from what I was reading, I do feel for Logan as well. It sounds like at least over the last stretch, the team has very much just kind of abandoned him to some extent, where he was like not really. The team was not really interacting with him much outside of race weekends and whatnot. He was just kind of being left alone in his pad in the UK, like show up to do his sim driving and whatnot, and then go home. His family, his girlfriend, everyone's in the US, and he has no one on the team that was really coming around him. I mean, it's got to be a brutal situation to be in. Yes, it's caused by him to some extent, but I mean, the kid obviously wasn't trying to crash the cars. Like, that's not his goal. His goal is not to go out there and just be like, oh, let me cause millions of dollars of damage today. Like, no one wants
Of course
to do
not.
that. But yeah, just a tough situation for him. I mean, just as tough kind of as Nick DeVries in
Sure.
last year and everything. So yeah, just a pretty big change for the Williams squad going into this week's race and the rest of the season.
Dude, I was laughing when I saw the the announcement from Williams that they'll be putting Colapinto in there. I was dying, and the replay of him, like, 2 wheels on the grass and spinning, hit the wall. I was just dying at this image of James Vowles, like, wherever he was watching, like down in the paddock or whatever, before he even like hits the wall, him just like picking up his cell phone, calling like an agent, and just being like, yeah, is there anybody available? Like, mid-spin, right? He's, like, picking up his phone. He's just like, final straw, you know?
That's why it took so long for the radio message to come through that the car was on fire, because
exactly
they had to hang up the other call first.
Right. They didn't even see if he was okay first. They just had to find somebody else to put there, and then they're like, hey, the car's on fire, mate. You should pop out.
By the way.
By the way, dog.
Sick picture,
my heart goes out to sick photo. Yeah, he's like skipping out of that thing. But yeah, as a human being, my heart goes out to Logan. But I mean, Williams got to do what they got to do. They need to.
100%.
They need to fix the scenario for sure.
Yeah, it's a business decision at that point. It's not personal, and so you have to do it. But yeah, just tough to be in that position as a whole. But now we'll get into this week's Dutch Grand Prix weekend review. We had some F1 Academy as well that we'll talk about. But before we do that, just as a reminder, if you're listening to us, welcome back from the summer break. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. We're looking to reach our goal of 100 subscribers by the end of the year in the F1 season, so we'd really appreciate it if you haven't, to go ahead and like and subscribe. We appreciate it a lot. It helps us go a long way to reaching that goal of ours, and we love putting this out there, so thank you for listening.
Yeah, we appreciate you very much. Let your friends know that we got a new podcast coming after every Formula One race. Most of the times on Tuesday, but we're fitting this in because, our host Aaron was getting back from his honeymoon. So, all good. No worries there. Just wanted to thank you all for listening very much. And let's get back to the episode.
Sounds good. So, getting into the F1 Academy, it's been a little while since we've had a race. Last time was Barcelona in June. So, coming back in, we had 2 races this week. First race we had Abby Pulling on pole, and then second race Dorian Penn was on pole. Both of them great starts out of the gate in each of their races, respectively. But both going and taking pole to victory for each of their races. Some pretty good racing and everything. I felt like you could tell that it was a little while since they had officially raced. We had a couple of cars stall on the starting line in, I believe, race 2. So a tough way to go there, but overall, another huge weekend. Abby picking up her 5th win of the season. Dorian Penn getting her 2nd with the negated win from, forget which week it was. I think it was round 2 in week 1 or race 2 in week 1. Where she was disqualified for taking the finish line twice. But
That's right.
but yeah, so a big haul of points for both of them. Abby pulling away in the standings to put a pretty big gap there with 3 race weekends to go. Still a lot of points with there being 2 races each of those weekends, but yeah, really good drive from Pulling and Dorian Penn as well.
Yeah, I thought in the first race, I think the level between Pulling, Pin, and Marty was very close. It felt like kind of any 3 of them could have won the race until, like you were saying, the 5-second penalty comes in for Dorian Pan. But the way that the drivers were racing, they're super competitive with each other, which is always exciting, I would say. So that was fun for race 1. And then, yeah, the thing that really stuck out to me was Dorian Pan in race 2. Her starting position was very aggressive. She was angled like, I don't know what the term would be, but she was significantly angled towards her opponent in P2 to give her a nice cover off of kind of any action kind of coming her way. So just a really heads-up starting plan from her. It was evident she had a clear understanding of what she would like to do at the start, and it seemed like she executed kind of perfectly on that plan, converts that P1 into a victory, so I thought that was really exciting. And then, like we had talked about, the knockout from Gottman, especially when the driver that they knock out has historically been so competitive, it's tough to see her get knocked out because usually, Nobles is pretty good for a couple points in each of the races. The other thing I wanted to comment on was the McLaren-supported driver, Bustamante. Unfortunately, kind of absent this weekend, so tough to see that for her. But yeah, overall, I thought for F1 Academy, pretty solid, but obviously just more dominance from Abby Pulling and Dorian Pan.
Yeah, and with Gottman or Gademan, I forget what the pronunciation is, but being the wild card driver being thrown in and everything, a really nice performance from her. Finishing P10 in race 2, but getting a really awesome P4 in the first race. To come in with not having that same experience as the other drivers and to finish P4, that's just super impressive.
Agreed.
So big props to her coming in for this F1 Academy weekend.
But yeah, let's get into the kind of meat of the weekend because we didn't have any Formula 3 or Formula 2 at this track, I don't believe.
Nope.
So we'll just be right into the main event. Just maybe a little sprinkling of qualifying, but yeah, we can get into the race.
Yeah, so one of the things before the race weekend that I saw that was interesting. So this was Max Verstappen's 200th Grand Prix, and so in the since 2000, Kimi Räikkönen had been the only world champion that had not won their 200th race. Michael Schumacher, Jenson Button, Fernando Alonso. Nico Rosberg, Lewis Hamilton, Seb Vettel, all had won their 200th race, along with, of course, their being world champions. So Max coming into his 200th Grand Prix would have only been the second one since 2000 to not win. Of course, as we know it, he did not. So he joins Kimi Räikkönen on that list of not winning their 200th race, unfortunately. But I thought that was a pretty interesting stat that many of these previous world champions on their 200th race had won their race. Like, that's just kind of a bizarre stat to have. But yeah.
Yeah, you got to figure at that point. I mean, 200 races is not that deep in, right? So I mean, it's a lot, but at the same time, it's not where most of the drivers after that 200th race have gone on, like they went on to race much more after that. That's kind of what I'm
Right.
getting at.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. You got to figure like most of them were peaking right around that time, and or were in like peak machinery as well.
Right.
So it's interesting to think if you were to go back and look at some of those race days for the, what are now, I think, like legends of the sport, you would say, like, some of those race days were likely pretty unlosable for those drivers. I mean, like you think of the pedigree of name that
Oh
you're
yeah.
saying, those guys didn't lose often. So I imagine whether it was your 190th or your 200th, their chances of winning were pretty sky high just by virtue of being on the grid.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, and all being world champions and everything as well that you're
Right.
looking at in the statistic. But yeah, I mean, unfortunate timing for the Red Bull car to
My boy
just
Lando.
not have been getting the development, and it was. I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit more, but before we do, just the main thing from qualifying, the main notes that I wanted to kind of talk about. One, unfortunately, Alex Albon, after a stunning P8 qualifying, gets disqualified from the qualifying session for an issue with the new floor that Williams had put on. For whatever reason, their measurements, James Vowles said their measurements of the new floor that they put on said it was within regulation. For whatever reason, the measurements that Formula One used after the qualifying session said that it was outside of those regulations. So there's a huge bummer for Alex after a phenomenal qualifying session. And I think, unfortunately, just taking him out of any contention for a points finish in the race, going from a P8 starting position, dropping down to a P19 starting position, is just brutal. And in a Williams car that has not been super successful across the season, it was a great opportunity for them to try and snag some points. But yeah, disappointing way for the weekend to kind of be over before it even started, with Logan's
Hmm.
crash as well, him not being able to even participate in the qualifying session. Just a really tough weekend for the Williams team.
And if I was writing the rules, I would find the team, but the driver gets to keep position because the driver would have no effect on a decision or the floor of his car. He's just supposed to hop in and drive it to the best of his ability. So if I was making the rules, like I said, I wouldn't penalize the driver. I would penalize the team in some way. Unfortunately, you can penalize the team by penalizing the driver in that regard, because they would be the ones, I guess, reaping the rewards if this illegal floor was advantageous and a boost over some of the other vehicles. Believe me, I understand it. Just a little tag on to a well said point about Albon's DQ, because yeah, man, if they were gonna slurp some points, it was gonna be then.
Oh, it would have been huge. I mean, he goes from that P19 starting position and climbs all the way up into P14. I imagine if he had been in that P8 starting position in a race that it was pretty difficult for a lot of drivers to make moves and get past, that he could have potentially bagged 1, 2, maybe even 4 points during the race. But an unfortunate way for that to go. So I'll just let that start off and kick off the winners and losers segment for the race this week, because
For sure.
Alex Albon was one of my 2 losers. He just
Same.
unfortunately, I mean, we just went through it all, but just a very unfortunate situation for him, completely outside of his control, and so he definitely, in my opinion, lost out on those points to no fault of his own there.
Well, and the one thing that sent it over the edge for me, for Alexander Albon to factor him in to be my number 1 loser for the weekend, just because I mean I'm a big softie for my boy Albon. I've enjoyed his racing for a good time now. The one thing that pushed it over the edge for me was in the closing section of the race, there was a moment where Kevin Magnussen was doing his best to hold off a small pack of drivers behind him to open up room for Hulkenberg, to give Hulkenberg the best chance of, keeping the gap. The driver directly behind Magnussen in this position was Alexander Albon, and when you look at the data, there were a couple of moments where he was pulling completely off the throttle in turns that should be flat out turns, really, really messing with Alexander Albon's race at that point. They're coming into the final turn. There's 5 cars now barreling into turn 5, all because Kevin Magnussen was backing the pack up. This is where you see Pierre Gasly make the lunge around. Fernando Alonso scoops up some positions, and who gets done in all of this? Alexander Albon, and it's from a Kevin Magnussen that pits on the very next lap. He's just like, ho, 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 my job done. And it's like, bro, what are we doing here? So I would argue insult to injury in that regard, where Albon's doing his best and he just gets caught up in some weird strategy, right? On top of having a tough time.
And again, had a nice race going from P19 to P14 in general in that Williams car. That's not easy to do. He drove a really solid race, had a slightly different tire strategy and everything, pitting a little bit earlier, I believe, than the majority of the field. Just a rough situation. My second loser this week, they can't keep getting away with it. Kick Sauber, I finally had to just throw them on this list, because
put them on blast.
I really didn't have someone else that I felt was a massive loser out during this race weekend, other than, we talked about Logan Sargent, but Kick Sauber's just made no improvements throughout the season. It's impossible to even tell if Valtteri or Zhou are driving decently or anything, because the car doesn't even have any glimmer of hope or any semblance of a chance to do anything, in my opinion. They're qualifying towards the back of the grid, both at the back this week and everything. Just it's so frustrating to see, and they weren't even close. I mean, Valtteri is 2/10 off of Esteban Ocon, and Daniel Ricciardo from making it through. Zhou's a full second and a half almost off of them with his times. Like, they're just stuck. These drivers have no way of showing whether they have any quality of drive at all because the car is just so bad. And I have not heard anything about Kick Sauber trying to do anything for the car. I don't know, maybe they're just sliding under the radar, letting all the Audi news kind of drown out the fact that they're not spending money to do anything, and but it just feels like they are just out there for no particular reason, not doing anything. They haven't scored a point all season. It's just kind of embarrassing for the team, and I finally had the opportunity that I couldn't ignore them anymore, and so they're my second loser of this week.
Yeah, because unfortunately you would find them in like P17, P16, right? It was never a flat 19th and 20th, where you can solidly say, like, yeah, they have not shown any glimmers of hope.
Yeah, it's just so disappointing. They were both 2 laps down, the only drivers to be lapped twice during the race. Even our boy Logan Sargent was up in P16. Like, there's no hope for that car in my opinion at this point, and it's frustrating to watch. Like, cars just lapping with no intention of attempting to be competitive with anyone. They're not even trying to make it into the midfield at this point. It feels like Haas, when they flat out said they were doing no improvements to the car for the next year and a half or whatever it was. It's irritating. So yeah, that's my 2 losers for the week.
Yeah, no, I think that's quite valuable there for the Kick Sauber squad. My loser here was Mercedes on the weekend. I think, especially with George Russell's car experiencing serious tire degradation, calling for the off strategy that they tried with the soft tires. George, they were just, whatever tire he was on was just falling off a cliff very quickly. Lewis Hamilton with the penalty from qualifying, which was, in my opinion, maybe kind of silly, and unfortunately puts him like really out of contention to make waves at all. So for a team that was lighting up the marquee and lighting up the scoreboards before we went on break, I think this was a very just like middling result for Mercedes, who were surging before we took a break. So I think for those reasons, Mercedes is my second loser.
Yeah, and after surging to try and really gain on Ferrari, who was no longer really out of reach, then to lose points to both Ferrari cars this week, definitely a rough week for Mercedes. So I definitely am with you there. But kind of damage mitigation after Lewis's poor qualifying, but. Yeah, if they're going to continue to climb, they're going to have to keep on the trajectory they had leading into the summer break.
Yeah, and it seems like maybe kind of a track dependent type thing. So I'm holding out hope for the. Could you say the Brackley boys? Where's their
Brackley.
Where's their headquarters?
I believe it's Brackley.
Gotcha. While you're hitting the Googs, yeah, my first winner then for Brackley. The weekend. Hell yeah, for the Brackley boys. My first winner here for the weekend is a total joke because I couldn't come up with anything better. Is Williams. They finally get the opportunity. They give them. It's like it's like the decent enough boyfriend, but he never does anything that you can like break up with him for, right? He's like really nice. His family's great. He has a car, but you're just not feeling it. And then you know what he does? Accidentally, he smashes your mom's favorite vase. And you know what? There it is. There's the excuse I was looking for. We can kick him to the curb now. So thankfully, Williams finally gets the chance they deserve to break up with their, kind of nice boyfriend, but it just wasn't doing it for him. So that's my winner.
Nice only goes so far, and so
Exactly.
So Williams with the winner, winning by subtraction here.
Well said.
For the squad, but I'll give you my first winner being Mr. Pierre Gasly. He gets the addition of a new teammate this week, but also picks up 2 points here in the P9 finish after the Alpine team had kind of looked like they were points contention, then slid back out and have been waffling all around that area. Another couple points for the squad is really big for them to put a little bit of space, a little more space between them and the Williams team, and then kind of inch closer towards Haas and VCarb, who both were unable to pick up any points this weekend. So at the bottom of the field there, any of those points count massively. So a big 2 points for Pierre there this week, and just an overall nice drive. Very good wheel-to-wheel racing when he was up against, I believe it was Sainz at one point. Like you said as well, a nice sweep around the outside when Magnussen was trying to hold people up, and a pretty nice move there. I believe that's what we were saying earlier. But
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, nice weekend for Pierre, and big props to him.
Yeah, big time agree. I think that moment towards the end of the race was just a big time. Like, man, I don't even care about you. Give me these points. He was gunning for it. So yeah, I think well deserved there for Pierre Gasly. And then you and I, independent of each other, we do not decide these things before. They are decided by non-committee. We come up with these individually. Our winner was Ferrari, and for you by extension, Charles Leclerc. After a tougher qualifying session for them, they recovered their weekend really, really well on Sunday. I think slurping up way more points than they even expected, as Charles said in one of his post-race interviews. He said, kind of a happy surprise, happy result. But yeah, they were pleasantly surprised, and yeah, I think they did really well, improving on their Saturday positions on Sunday, and just nailing the tire aspect of the race, which, like we had talked about previously, gave some other teams like a good amount of trouble. So yeah, I think Ferrari hooked it up really well.
Yeah, and like you said with Charles being my winner, huge for him to get P3, and Carlos having a great race, finishing P5 as well. It looked like after qualifying that Ferrari had the fourth fastest car of the week. They didn't seem to be quite up there, just a tad behind Mercedes. But like you said, the tire degradation that Charles and Carlos were able to hold on to allowed them to really put in a great weekend. Pick up a few more points over Mercedes, who'd been surging, and so overall just a nice positive for the Ferrari team leading into another home race here at Monza. So it'll be exciting to see if they can continue fighting in that area with that battle with Mercedes in particular.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's going to be kind of tight all the way to the end. If we paid attention towards the end of the broadcast, I believe they said if, and this is just to kind of illustrate how tight it is for everybody, and what's at stake for Lando. He can still win the drivers' championship if he wins, I guess, every race plus all the fastest laps, I think. So the amount of points available are going to become just less and less every weekend. It's going to become more and more dire. And like we were talking about there with, Ferrari and some of the teams that are hunting them in the Constructors Championship, it's going to be all to play for, I think, with how close some of these cars are to each other, depending on the track.
Yeah, and like you said, and I believe that was if Lando finishes P1 with fastest lap and Max is P2 for the rest of the season, then he would just overtake him by the end. But of course, as we've talked about, all it takes is a DNF or something going awry. So just not something that I feel like we can expect very much anymore. We haven't had really too many incidents, DNFs, much of anything over the past 5-6 races, if I remember correctly. I think Canada was the last time that there was something when I was listening and reading up on it after the race. But overall, this weekend, a circuit that typically has safety cars, that drivers are struggling with the banking and the curves and everything, but no safety cars, no red flags, really any issues throughout the race, and no DNFs. The reliability of these cars has improved so much over the past few years that you can't anticipate that. But again, all it takes is someone, I don't know, Valtteri Bottas bowling his kick Sauber through the field at turn 1 or something, and all of a sudden you're gonna be in a weird situation. So nothing out of reach for sure when it comes to the drivers, or particularly the constructors' standings. 70-point gap for Max in the drivers' standings, only a 30-point gap in the constructors, which can easily be eaten up. Talking about just some of the other points of the race, talking about Red Bull.
Sure.
Max, I was overall just like very impressed. I was watching the race in a bar. He had a great start, takes the lead from the beginning. I was like, that is his, pretty much in my mind, it was his only shot at winning the race this week, was if he was able to get out in front from the start, use the clean air and everything to put some sort of gap, or maybe cause Lando's tires to degrade, being in that dirty air behind him following. But the McLaren car is just so quick. It felt just like Max drove a solid race, didn't make any mistakes, but just the car wasn't there for him. And McLaren and Lando, outside of that start, didn't make any mistakes. But also, just on the Red Bull side, I was super impressed with Checo bouncing back after not historically having great performances at Zandvoort. He put in a solid drive, unfortunately slipped back a little bit with losing the P5 position to Carlos Sainz and dropping back to P6. But overall, I was pretty impressed with how he did after all the criticism and issues he's had, to come back refreshed and to put in a pretty clean drive overall. It was a solid weekend for Sergio, and that's what Red Bull's going to need if they're going to be able to hang in there with the Constructors' Championship, which is looking less and less likely. But also, just in terms of Max needing his teammate up there with him, I think that's a big step forward for Checo.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think it was the maybe easy analysis would be to say maybe a much needed break for Sergio, able to refresh, recenter, kind of maybe find whatever in himself that he was missing. Maybe had some talks like with his engineers. Maybe had some talks with who knows, maybe some kind of personnel that we probably can't even fathom to get his side of the paddock back on track, or what would you say, his side of the garage back on track, because we don't know that it was all coming from him. But yeah, just solid to see the other half of the Red Bull squad kind of returning to form, I would say, from where I think you would want Sergio Perez to be and kind of where we expect him to be. The drop in form was, I think, pretty unexpected in some way, not what you're used to seeing from Sergio, even from his like Force India days. He didn't really have these like weird drops in form like that. Pretty consistent overall. So yeah, happy to see them back in that regard.
Yeah, and just in terms of that for him, like you said, he's been a pretty consistent driver. The only other instance was really when he started losing the championship in the head-to-head versus Max, kind of just losing, being a little bit shaken up by that. But he really, I think, refocused well coming into the weekend and is doing what he needs to do. The car doesn't seem to be the easiest to drive at the moment. The tire degradation was definitely worse than we were seeing with some of the other cars. So hopefully as they work out some of those things, he got a lot of great data for Red Bull with the upgrade package. I believe Max had actually reverted to a very old floor from like week 5 for his car, when the car was just working like much better, because they didn't end up getting as much data with the new floor and everything with the practice sessions this week. It seems like Checo was able to not only pick up some solid points for the team, but get a lot of good data for them on their upgrade package to hopefully be able to go and make some changes and adjustments going into Monza here. So looking forward to seeing if they can bounce back and start to challenge the McLaren team again. But looking at McLaren, I mean, every upgrade they've brought to the car has been a step forward. We haven't seen any of these instances like we've seen with any number of other teams, from V-Carb to Aston Martin to Haas to Red Bull, where they introduce an upgrade package and it just does not work the way that the sim data and everything anticipates it to. They're bringing upgrades and it is improving the car every time. Like I said with Lando, a tough start, whether that's a car thing, or it's just him not quite having that same skill set as Max right from the get-go. He drove phenomenally. Dominant win. 22 seconds is a massive gap, and he was just able to continue putting those times in, get the fastest lap without pitting right at the end of the race on old tires. Just a beautiful drive from Lando for his second career win. So big congratulations to him. And then Oscar driving just very nicely as well. Not quite up there in the qualifying session as he probably should have been, but no knock to him. He was unfortunately just stuck right at the end behind Charles Leclerc, unable to get past after using too much of his tire to get his way back up into that P4 position. I think the tires just went away from him at that point.
Yeah, I think the start for, both him and Lando was pretty rough, actually. I think Lando losing out at the start to Max was a bit of a fumble, and then Piastri losing out to George Russell as well. Like, he was never able to recover that position. You saw him, fight try and fight on the inside line of the what do they call that? The embankment.
Yeah.
Uh, Hairpin, the embanked hairpin. You could see him take the lower line where George Russell went to take the upper line. Russell just has more grip coming out of the exit, and yeah, Piastri's never able to recover. So I think that's like my big sticking point. Thank gosh McLaren had the pace to be able to recover that. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be desired with the McLaren starts, where too often Lando specifically is losing these podium position or pole positions to who's ever P2 or P3 due to a poor start process, whatever's going on. So that's something that I think we'll need to see, but yeah, able to recover pretty well. So solid for McLaren. And yeah, like you said, there was a great second win for him. That's solid.
Yeah, so big week for them, and like we had discussed, the constructor standings, driver standings are still very, very much within reach for both for McLaren. I really, at this point, if things go the way they're going, McLaren is going to be the constructors champions. I'm having trouble imagining that going any other way. So we'll see if any of the other teams can challenge as we're getting late into the season. Upgrade packages are going to be few and far between in terms of the money that's left for the teams to bring those upgrades in and everything. And with what's in the pipeline, so this may be kind of what we're looking at and anticipating over the next races, other than just anything track dependent, or track or weather dependent. But yeah, I mean, not the most exciting race overall, but an awesome win for Lando with all the orange in the stands there, all that papaya in the stands for him. Definitely not for Max, but no, a fun race. To see Lando get that second win and get that under his belt. So big congrats for him.
Yeah, I think what else can we kind of hit on? I thought the Fernando Alonso race was pretty solid. I think obviously just kind of in the middle of the pack, but he was one of the ones that came up on the Magnussen little scuffle and able to make the most of that. So I think that really boosted them up. And then unfortunately, I think the V carbs looked pretty tough this weekend as well. I think Yuki had a pretty tough time of it. But Daniel Ricciardo looked really good. He had a race with Lance Stroll at some point that he was able to get the better of. So I thought that was pretty impressive. So V carb, I think looking and trending upwards. I think we got to see much more from them before we would call them like competitive. But yeah, I think both Yuki and Daniel Ricciardo are driving really well and are taking V-Carb in a solid direction.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, they're doing what they can. It was a tough weekend for Yuki, but like you said, Daniel, solid race. I don't think there was much more that he could have done there, and a P12 finish is definitely not bad by any means when the car is just where it is. My only other highlight, and you mentioned Fernando Alonso, but Hulkenberg, being in that P11 position, just right on the edge of points once again for him in the Haas. He's been in that spot numerous times this season. And so another good drive with a little bit of help from his teammate Kevin Magnussen. But yeah, that was my only other note for the race this week.
Nice. Yeah, I think Zandvoort is a lot of fun. The bank turns I think are really exciting. It is a dynamic course. I thought this weekend specifically was really fun. Having changeable conditions over a variety of the sessions. We saw some wet running. We saw a bunch of dry running. Obviously, the race day on Sunday was effectively beautiful. We had some cooling temperatures, I believe, like leading into the race, but no worries there. So yeah, overall, just a really interesting kind of dynamic weekend. Some teams having a tougher time of it than others. But yeah, we had the Lando Norris victory, P1, Max Verstappen, P2, and then Charles Leclerc surprisingly up into that P3 position to round out the podium. So yeah, that was our review for the 2024 Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort. Yeah, I think it was a fun one, and Lando Norris fucking getting that second dub.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, wrapping out this week's episode, we'll hit you all with the cool down lap. We're going to do flavor of the week this week. Justin, do you want to lead it off? Should I lead it off? How do you want to go?
Well, I want to hear all about the honeymoon, so I'm actually willing to concede my side of the cooldown lap, and I really just want to hear about like each of these like a little in depth. I don't want you to like fly through it. I want to feel Portugal in my blood as you're telling me about this, because there's no way anything I say will be as interesting as this. Like, I want to hear about the pesto class.
All right, so I'll start off with my food this week, but as I had mentioned initially in Portugal, with my little shout out for Mario there, during our exploring Sintra and all in that area near Lisbon in Portugal, part of that day was we got to have just this phenomenal Portuguese. Just like the typical Portuguese kinds of foods for lunch and everything. We had some. One of the big things is codfish. It's one of their common like foods that they use in dishes and meats and all. So a really just delicious codfish with a little bit of curry and whatnot for lunch, along with this slow roasted chicken that had been roasted for a couple of hours. Some great red wine. It was just a nice time enjoying eating probably more food than I needed to and whatnot to refuel after a day of walking around botanical gardens and exploring all these cool areas there in Sintra. But the pesto class, that was in Italy, in Cinque Terre. That was a really cool experience. Colleen had found there is this gorgeous overlook over a bay in one of these small towns in Cinque Terre, and we were able to get in for this pesto class where they bring everyone in, they give you the basil plant, fresh with like the roots and everything, and kind of bring you all the different ingredients through the process, walk you through it, soak it, like picking the basil leaves from the plant, soaking them in water, prepping the mortar and pestle and everything with some garlic and salt to get that coated and everything, and then like working through and like crushing up all of the basil leaves, the cheeses, the pine nuts, and everything together. It's the best pesto that I've ever had, and it was so cool that I got to make it with Colleen and just have that experience together. Enjoy it on some nice bread with just with wine and a beautiful overlook of the ocean or of the Mediterranean Sea and everything. It was just quite an experience, something that I couldn't have imagined would have been. I was very skeptical when Colleen was pushing this so much. I'm like, so you're telling me that I'm paying how much money to cook my own food? I don't know about this, but it ended up being just such a great time. It has inspired me to want to try and make pesto at home with just our probably not as good American ingredients that we'll have here, but whether it's we have our basil plant that we're growing in the back and whatnot, using some of those fresh ingredients and whatnot. I'm looking forward to being able to bring that new recipe that I have in my repertoire home, but a very, very cool experience for both of those, getting to try some of the just like local cuisines in both of those places and just have a nice time. For my music part of it, it was just very interesting going around. A lot of the places had just music playing in restaurants during dinner, in the little shops, on the different experiences we had. And there were just so many remixes of songs, but they were all just like good vibes, like chill, relaxed. It really fed in, and it was like, it didn't seem intentional to like ease the tourists or anything. It just seemed like that was the energy of the whole trip that we went on. Every
Nice.
place we went was just like relaxing, fun, good food, good experiences, and the music just added to that ambiance kind of everywhere that we seemed to go. To the point that I was just like sitting in Portuguese restaurants hitting Shazam on my phone to add these songs to my Spotify playlists at a later point in time and everything. And,
Nice.
And on the Sintra tour, we're in this like Portuguese Jeep, so we're just sitting on bench seats in the back of this open air like truck basically and everything, and the Mario's just bumping music. We're listening to mixes of just like American pop songs, remixes, Portuguese artists and everything, and it all just meshed so well. It was it all of that just throughout our trip really added to the vibes and energy, and it was just really pretty cool that
Sure.
I think an unintentional aspect, like for me, it was a noticeable difference from what I feel like I'm used to here in the States. So it was pretty cool. But my visual medium was just our first night in Cinque Terre. We took a sunset boat cruise. We had after a very interesting experience of me when we were in Lake Como and then going down to Cinque Terre, we rented a car, and so I was driving a stick shift car through some very mountainous, tight roads to the point where in Lake Como it's a cliff drop off on one side, of course with guardrails, but where that road that you're driving on at many different sections, you have to physically stop if there's a car coming the other way, because there's not room enough for two cars to go side by side through these areas. So I'm doing that in a stick shift car, which I had not driven in, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years since I had last driven a stick shift car. But doing that and then coming down from Como to Cinque Terre through the mountains and everything was very cool, very beautiful views. I appreciated it a lot more than if I had just been in like an Uber or something like that going around. But then getting to Cinque Terre, we're dropped off the rental car. We're like, we're done with this. Get over onto the Sunset Boat Cruise, and we're just getting to hop off the boat in the middle of the Mediterranean with the sun setting and everything, and it was beautiful. Such a cool thing. We're seeing all of the little towns from the water and everything, and getting to learn a little bit about each place from our boat captain as he's taking us around and everything, and just some really cool experiences. It was awesome to see some beautiful parts of the world that I had never seen or experienced before. I always recommend for anyone who has the opportunity and is able to travel, if they can or want to. I think it's such a great experience to open your mind up to other cultures, other people, and to like kind of learn more about the world and kind of thereby about yourself and like your place in it. I think it's completely worth it for anyone who is able to, and we're definitely fortunate to be able to have such an amazing trip. But yeah, that's my kind of short bit. I know it was a lot, but my flavor of the week for our honeymoon.
No, that's exciting. I'm happy to hear about it, because that's that sounds like a one in a lifetime trip, especially with the with the person that you look at as your best friend, the one you want to do everything with. That's a really exciting experience to share. So yeah, that's super exciting. I'm happy to hear all about it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. It was such a fun time. I have my favorite travel buddy with me, with Colleen. She crushes it. She was a little skeptical of me being like, yeah, I'll take the stick shift car, because I was like, it was either a smaller stick shift car or like a slightly larger like automatic car, and I'm like, I'll do the stick shift. I wanted something smaller that was easier to maneuver and all.
Sure.
Not knowing really as much that it came in handy a lot, having the smaller car. But she trusted me on it, and went with the flow. It was just an awesome trip. She's told me she was very impressed with my stick shift, my manual driving and everything. She was a little concerned, but she let me do it, and was okay that I did afterwards. So we made it in one piece. Questioned whether or not we should have gotten the upgraded insurance a couple of different times, but no scratches or issues with the car by the end of it. So the higher insurance next time might be in the ballpark or in the budget, but it panned out this time. So
that's solid. Well, yeah, man. Happy to hear that you're home safe. Obviously, we didn't have to, cash in on any life insurance that you may or may not have purchased with the vehicle. But yeah, happy that it went well. Happy that you're safe here back in the States. But yeah, that kind of brings us to the end of the episode, with our coverage of the 2024 Dutch Grand Prix. Another exciting one in the books. Just want to thank everybody for listening. Wanted to thank everybody for joining the stream this evening. Thank you very much. And we will be back after Monza, hopefully for regularly scheduled programming on a Tuesday evening. But yeah, that's going to do it for the Tyred boys here.
Yeah, thank you guys again. It's been a blast, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Peace out, everyone. Thank you very much.